What is up guys, this is Tito back with another video, and today in this video I'm gonna be reviewing the latest Ryzen 5 5600X, which is based on like Zen 3 architecture, and that is a 7nm CPU, and I have been using it for a couple of days now. And if you wanna see the full build and stuff, you can click on the card right there if you wanna actually know about the whole build. But you can see the components that I have, like some boxes behind me. The actual cabinet is like right here, over here. So if you're wondering about the specs of this particular PC, here you can see I have been using this B550GB Aorus Pro AC motherboard. I have the Ryzen 5 5600X, as you are noticing right there. The GPU here which I am using is the Zotac GTX 1070. This is the mini variant 8GB version. First, let me talk about the motherboard's BIOS stuff, and I would say the first time when I bought the motherboard did not have the latest BIOS update to support this Ryzen 5000 CPUs. So that is why the vendor updated it to the version F10. And after updating the BIOS, that is when it supported the CPU. And of course, it was not booting before that. And that is why they had to update, of course, to the F10. And on the F10 BIOS, there was some issues, but that got fixed with the updates. And right now, talking about the BIOS updates, there has been a lot of updates with the BIOS. And I have got the F11D update on the BIOS side, then F11G, then right now it is on F11I. So that is how it is. Even AMD has talked about a newer BIOS update with which you can do even more overclocking stuff. But yes, the overclocking headroom of this CPU may not be much, but I'm not into too much overclocking. But yes, this is an unlocked CPU. If you want to overclock it, you can totally do that. This is a 5600X, so that X says it's overclocking. Now, talking about overclocking for this Ryzen CPU, there is a separate software, of course, from AMD that is called Ryzen Master, if you're not familiar with that. And with that, you can just one click overclock it as you want to, because there is the auto overclock or auto OC stuff. So you just click it and apply, then the PC just reboots once, and that's it. That's how you have the overclock right out of the box. And it depends on the cooler you have, and I did not change the cooler. This CPU comes with a Wraith Stealth cooler, and I would say yes, my experience with the Wraith Stealth cooler is not that great. It's kind of mixed feeling in my personal opinion, because the CPU gets hot. We'll talk about the temps later on, but yes, it does get hot if you are someone who can spend some money. But the CPU is, of course, again overpriced kind of. Here in India, it's too much overpriced. That's true. So you should not spend much. But I would say yes, if you don't have the budget, stick with the stock cooler. And in my opinion, AMD should have included the Wraith Spire cooler, if I recall it correctly. The cooler that ships with the 3600X, not the 3600. 3600 gets the Wraith Stealth cooler, this same cooler which is there in this 5600X, and the 3600X gets the Wraith Spire cooler, I think. But here the 5600X, the AMD just cheap out on it. I don't know why, but yeah, you get the basic cooler, which is this kind of thickness, I would say. So not that much of cooling that you get over here. Now, talking about the RAM, I have two sticks of Adata XPG GAMX D30. That is a 3000 MHz RAM, and I have two 16GB sticks, of course. Earlier, I was having some issues with the overclocking, but right now not so much, because I overclocked it up to 3200 MHz, not much, from 3000 to just 3200. So that is not too much, yeah, but still it's something. So with 3200 CL16, I would say it's working totally fine, totally stable, no issues with the RAMs I have. But yeah, you can definitely get, if you're building right now, if you are someone who does not have any RAM sticks, and if you're building it clean, I had already the same RAM stick. That is why I had to get another one, same one. So that is why I am going with over here 3000, 3200 megahertz. That's why I went with it. Otherwise, if you're building fresh, I would say go for at least a 3600 megahertz kit, because that really matters for these Ryzen CPUs. Now, let me show you the gaming benchmarks. So first up is Apex Legends, and here I played with high settings, 1080p of course, and with this the average frame rate, as you can see, is about 111 frames. Max I got is 145, and the minimum frame rate is 68. Next is Call of Duty Warzone, of course really popular right now, with very high settings, and with my GPU and with 1080p settings, I got about average of 88 frames. And then if you look at the max stats, about 200 plus, pretty much average 90 frames you can take it, and the minimum is about 59 or 60. Pretty playable, I would say. And by the way, while all of these gaming instances, my GPU is getting bottlenecked, so that is why I cannot really get much FPS or more FPS than this, because my GPU is at 100% and the CPU usage stays about, like in Warzone, it stays about 45 to 50%. In other games, I have noticed it like the CPU just stays below 30, or even if I'm playing like Valorant or something, the CPU usage goes like 15 or like 10-12%. Next up is CSGO, and here with very high settings 1080p, the average frame rate I'm getting is about 336 FPS, which is just stupidly like too much FPS. And here the max FPS is 401 and the minimum is 198, so that is about 200 minimum frame rate, so very playable of course. Next up is PUBG PC, and with PUBG PC Ultra settings in 1080p I got an average frame rate of 121, and the maximum frame rate that you can see over here is 262. So yeah, PUBG is pretty playable over here without any issues, no hiccups, no stutters at all, very much smooth experience. And the minimum frame rate which I got in PUBG is 56. Here we have the Valorant benchmarks, and here with very high settings 1080p, this is just stupidly like high level of frame rates. As you can see, with average frame rate of 525, and with like the max, as you can see, I got 600 plus frames, which is just like stupid. And the minimum, if you notice, is 123. So always it stays 100 plus like everywhere. And if you want to really see some gameplay and stuff of me playing some games, you can definitely check the description to, like, I will have a link of my gaming channel over there, and you can check the cards over there too. I can like put the link over there too. So yeah, make sure you check the card or the description to actually like see some gameplay footage or FPS if you wanna see all the things like the clocks and the like GPU memory usage or normal RAM usage, then the temps of GPU, CPU, everything. You can see that from there, and even the wattage is listed on that MSI Afterburner overlay. So do watch those videos from the other channel. I'll have link below if you want to actually see some gaming footages. Now let me show you guys some synthetic benchmarks. Now let's look at the Cinebench R20 multi-core performance. Here, as you can see, the 5600X kind of sits in the middle, but here if you notice, the 3700X is above it and the 5600X is actually closer to the 3700X's performance. Keep in mind, 3700X is a 8-core 16 thread and the 5600X is a 6-core 12 thread, whereas the Ryzen 5 3600X stays below it. And here, as you can see, the i7 9700K is way below that, and you can see the 10600K and stuff on the bottom. And if you are noticing on the top, there is the top spot for the 10900K and the 10700K. Next up is Cinebench R20 single core performance score, and here it is a complete bloodbath for Intel. As you can see, the 5600X takes the top spot and here it scores 612. So that is why even it is better than the i9 10900K in terms of the single core performance, or even the 10700K, then the 3700X, 3600X sits below it, then 10600K, 10600, etc. Everything else is below it. Now let's look at the Cinebench R23. So in multi-core again, the performance is kind of like in the middle of 3700X and the 3600X. So yeah, and the 10700K is way above, and of course the 9700K is way below that. Keep in mind, these 10700K and the 3700X both are like 8-core parts, whereas the 5600X is a 6-core part. Now let's look at the Cinebench R23 single core performance, and here again the Ryzen 5 5600X takes the crown with 1564 score. And if you notice, even the Core i9 10900K is below that at 1418 points, where it's like 150 points lesser than the 5600X. And then there is the 3600X, 10700K, 3700X, etc. Now in Geekbench 4, as you can see, again in single core performance, yes, the 5600X beats everything, but if you look at the multi-core performance, it scores about like 34,990 points. But yeah, it is closer to the 3700X again than the 3600X, as you can see over here. Even in multi-core performance, yes, the 10900K beats the 5600X of course in multi-core, because that is a 10-core part, But if you look at the 10700K's multi-core score, you will see that is about 32,000. So that means this 5600X even in multi-core scoring better than the 10700K, which is a 8-core part beaten by a 6-core 5600X in multi-core. In single core, there is no question, it beats everything. Again, in Geekbench 5, it sits in the top spot again in terms of single core performance. Then in multi-core, definitely gets beaten by i9 10900K. And if you look at the other multi-core scores, it is like scoring closer to the 10700K and even the 3700X, but it definitely is beating the 3700X even in multi-core performance over here. So as you just saw from the synthetic benchmarks, it pretty much rips apart Intel in single core performance, and I would say that is the most amazing thing about Zen 3, that the single core performance over here is really strong, and Intel has been the king over in the past about like on the single core performance area. But right now AMD definitely took the crown, and it took the crown by a huge margin in my personal opinion. Now let's focus on the productivity benchmarks. So in Puget System benchmark in DaVinci Resolve, as you can see, there is the 5600X above that 10700K and even the 10600K, but of course it gets beaten by the 10900K by about 130 points. Next we have the Photoshop benchmark, and here we have the 5600X and all other 5000 Ryzen series CPUs on top, and this beats everything else in the chart. So I would say if you're someone who is really into Photoshop and stuff, definitely the Ryzen 5000 CPUs are the thing which you should go for. In Premiere Pro, in standard overall score, as you can see, the 5600X sits quite low and it is beating the 10600K, but yes, 10700K scores like better than the 5600X. So yeah, kind of not quite the best one, but yeah, it is definitely not too bad. And I have been rating on this PC for a long time right now, and I would say the performance of like Premiere or even the DaVinci Resolve is really smooth. I never faced any kind of like glitches or like any stutters on the timeline, is just simply not there. And in Premiere there is right now the NVENC encoding and stuff. With like NVIDIA GPU, you will have a lot of advantages. The timeline is, I just said, is of course really smooth with full resolution 1080p, like 50 or 60 FPS. I would say it is really smooth experience. Even with like 6 to 7 layers of videos with lot of effects, it does not like lag. So that is how smooth experience it is over here in Premiere. If you are talking about exporting time of Premiere right now, I would say if I export a 18 minutes like 1080p 50 Mbps video, and that I export about like on 25 Mbps CBR, like one pass, can export a 18-minute long 1080p 60 or 50 FPS in about 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes. It will export it really easily, and I would say yeah, this is a really good experience. And by the way, cache disk which I am using over here is an SSD, that is the like Kingston A2000, which is a NVMe, and the read and write of that SSD is about like 2000 Mbps. So yeah, that is the performance I'm getting. 18 minutes videos, 1080p 60 FPS, you can export in like 4 minutes. And that is of course using the hardware encoding with the NVIDIA GPU. So yeah, and while exporting, I saw in Premiere the CPU usage stays about like 20 to 25%. Then the GPU usage goes above like 70%. If you have a much better GPU like the 2060 Super, or if you are someone who is willing to get the newer GPUs which are coming soon like the 3060 Ti or even the 3070 and stuff, I would say this is gonna be a hell of a like gaming and editing rig. Where this CPU actually fares and why I got this. By the way, let me actually talk about the power supply which I am using over here. Just guess the power supply which I will use like with this kind of spec. And if you're like building another PC with like a Intel CPU, I would say you definitely need a 750 or like 800 watt maybe, or even like at least 650 plus watt of power supply that you need pretty much if you're going with Intel. But here I have been using a VS550, a Corsair VS550, which is of course a 550 watt power supply, and that is faring really well. Because let me just show you the power consumption and the temps. Average power consumption, I would say I have seen it going in 40 watts, and the like idle temperature I have seen for about 40 degrees I would say, but here the average temperature while gaming it showed 51 degrees in hardware info. And here as you can see the max wattage it took about 75 watts. I've seen it going about 77 watts sometimes. And as you can see the maximum temperature is 81 degrees, which is quite a lot hot. And I would say yes, if you're gaming with unlocked FPS, this CPU gets hot. And if you're noticing the minimum wattage and the temperature, the minimum wattage is about 26 watts, which is quite low, and that is why this CPU is very efficient. And here as you can see the minimum temperature is about 33 degrees. Right now it's winter, so not getting too hot. So I would say this CPU is very much efficient, sits quite below 80 watts all the time, even when you are gaming. Now let's talk about the value for money kind of area. Is this a really value for money product? Not so much, because you can definitely get a 3600 for like a lot less money, which is gonna give you kind of similar performance, maybe not in gaming, but if you do not have plans to upgrade your GPU to at least above 2060 Super, maybe go with the 3600. That is what I would say. If you are someone who is planning to get a GPU, or you have a GPU that you're gonna use like for 2 to 3 years or more than that, or even 5 years, up to a 2060 Super, a Ryzen 5 3600 which is Zen 2 can do really well in that kind of segment. And that is going to be a really value for money, because the Ryzen 5 3600 comes at about below 20,000 price range, but this CPU goes way above, even though this should have been priced the same kind of over here. But yeah, right now the pricing in India just sucks, and here I have bought it for 28,500 rupees, which is not a value for money. You can even get the 3700 for about 29,000. There you get the Wraith Prism cooler or something like that, which has RGB and stuff with the 3600. So if you're someone who is kind of worried about future proofing because you are getting 8 core and 16 thread for 29,000, then you are buying a newer 6 core 8 thread for 28,500, just 500 less. So yeah, in that kind of perspective, you should definitely go with the 3700X if you have the budget. And I would say if you're going Intel, I don't know why would you go that route, because right now the 10600K is about 24,000 rupees and the 10700K is about 35,000 or something. So yeah, if you're going Intel, you can, if you have the money, go for it. And if you're someone who does not care about the power consumption and stuff, you can definitely go Intel route. Yeah, my last 3 PCs were Intel. One was the oldest one was Pentium 4, then I switched to the i3 1st gen, then i5 7th gen. So these 3 CPUs I have used Intel in the past, but right now I have finally made the switch to AMD because of the amazing single core performance. And even while using this PC, it does not feel like a 6 core PC, I would say, in my personal opinion. But yeah, if you're a really amazing in-depth review, you can definitely check Hardware Unboxed review over there on the cards. Or if you wanna see too many numbers, you can definitely see Gamers Nexus's video. Of course, I'll link them on the card right there if you are someone who is really interested in the neat details. So yeah, what kind of person this is for? If you wanna get the latest and greatest, this is the latest and greatest from AMD and from anywhere, because this is TSMC 7nm, the latest 7nm architecture, and this is Zen 3. And that, if you are someone who is looking at the single core performance scores in any benchmark right now, you go to Geekbench or Cinebench R20, R23, just check the highest single core performance. That is 4 CPUs. The Ryzen 9 5950X, the Ryzen 9 5900X, the 5800X, the Ryzen 7 5800X I mean, and then the Ryzen 5 5600X. Those are the top chart right now in the single core performance. But the problem is it is out of stock everywhere and you cannot simply buy it anywhere. As you can see from here in these websites, they are not available anywhere. So that wraps up this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and do share it out with your friends if you want them to know about the latest Ryzen 5 5600X. And if you want them to show the benchmarks and stuff, you can definitely link this video to them, share the link. So yeah, Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel down there if you have not yet. This is Tito from KDN Tech signing off for today, and I'll be catching you guys in the next one. Bye bye now.